Okay, we are recording.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sangamon Valley Democratic Club. My name is Brody Hill. I serve as president of the club. We are so glad that you were able to join us. Tonight, we have two great speakers who will tell us about cybersecurity. But first, our Sangamon Valley Democratic Club board would like to make a statement about the guilty verdict on April 20th. While Derek Chauvin was found guilty of all charges, including second-degree murder, that was accountability, but not justice. We applaud President Biden's quote, "This murder was in full light of day, and it ripped the blinders off," unquote, for all to see the problems with race and policing in the US. Quote, "It's not enough. We can't stop here." Vice President Kamala Harris said, "A measure of justice isn't the same as equal justice." And this deeply touches us here in Danville because we have not one, but two cases right here in Danville. A Danville police officer, Andrew Hall, shot and killed a person of color, a Filipino man, Vladimir Arboleda, in 2018. And just yesterday, our district attorney, Dinah Becton, announced that police officer Andrew Hall will be charged with voluntary manslaughter. On March 11th of this year, 2021, this same police officer, Andrew Hall, shot and killed Tyrell Wilson, who is a Black man with mental illness. Again, here in Danville. Police officer Andrew Hall is a white man, and in both cases, the victims he fatally shot were people of color. We join the chorus of voices in agreement that while the Chauvin verdict is a welcome relief, the trial was a mirror of the stark reality for all who watched. We can't stop here. As Martin Luther King Jr. stated, no, we are not satisfied. And we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. But thank you. Now for our meeting. We have all heard about the SolarWinds hack, and we all know something about the cyber attack, but do we really know about what actually happened? Do we know if the cyber attacks affect other companies, maybe some companies or businesses we shop at? Do we know about any vulnerabilities we have in our computers and phones? I think we're all looking forward to hearing our two speakers tonight. The introductions of our speakers is a bit long because they both have such wonderful backgrounds. We have Bryan Cunningham, who is a leading international expert on cybersecurity law and policy. He is the first executive director of UC Irvine's Cybersecurity Policy and Research Institute. His focus is developing strategies, whether they be technical, legal, policy, to combat cyber threats, protect individual privacy and civil liberties, maintain public safety, economic security, national security, and empower Americans to take better control of their digital security. Interestingly, Cunningham has served in intelligence and law positions in the US government. He served as deputy legal advisor to then National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice. He also served 6 years in the Clinton administration as a federal prosecutor and senior CIA officer. He has provided legal advice to the President, National Security Advisor, the National Security Council, and other senior government officials on intelligence, terrorism, and cybersecurity. In addition, Cunningham has a private law practice in Los Angeles dealing with privacy, cybersecurity, and data protection. He was a founding vice chair of the American Bar Association's Cybersecurity Privacy Task Force and was awarded the National Intelligence Medal of Achievement. He has also served on the National Academy of Sciences Committee on Biodefense Analysis. Our second speaker, Tom Kemp, is a Silicon Valley-based technology entrepreneur and CEO focused on cybersecurity. He has co-founded, invested in, and built multiple tech companies that have either gone public or have been acquired. These many tech companies have created over 1,500 jobs. Most recently, as founder and CEO of Centrify, a leading cybersecurity vendor, Kemp managed an organization of more than 500 people and over 5,000 customers. For his leadership of cybersecurity in the Silicon Valley tech community in 2018, Kemp was a finalist in the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year Award in Northern California. After Centrify was acquired in 2018, Kemp has spent the last 2.5 years volunteering. He is an executive board member of an education nonprofit. He coaches high school softball. He volunteered as a policy advisor for the Biden-Harris campaign and for the organization Californians for Consumer Privacy. You may remember Proposition 24. He led the efforts to pass it, the nation's most comprehensive privacy law. Thank you, Bryan and Tom, for being here tonight. Bryan, why don't you start us off?
Thanks, Brody. Thanks for having me, everyone. I must say I feel caught a little flat-footed by the end of the prior meeting. If I would have known we were going to have theater, I would have added to my CV that I was also the 1978 Thespian of the Year at Fremont Ross High School, and I would have prepared my arsenic and old lace monologue, but I'll spare you that.
Yeah, you put us to shame there.
Fortunately, I didn't have any notice of that. Brody, remind me, how's our time split? How long do you want me to talk?
You can talk as long as you would like. We're here, we want to hear you.
All right. So one of the blessings and the curses of working in cybersecurity is no matter when I speak, it seems like there's always some big news to talk about within the last week, and this week was no exception. One of the key points I want to make in this talk is that cyber warfare online can easily escalate into kinetic warfare, that is bombs and missiles and soldiers and sailors if we're not careful. And to that point, two things this week. One, the Biden administration stated that it was, quote unquote, aware of an alleged Israeli cyber attack leading to a kinetic explosion and a blackout on the Iranian nuclear development site at Natanz, whilst Israel threatened to retaliate. Iran threatened to retaliate against Israel, who they presumed was the attacker. And during the same week, a man in Texas attempted to buy explosives from the FBI to blow up an Amazon Web Services facility in Virginia with the aim of knocking part of the internet offline, which is interestingly very close real world analog to a fictional event we made up for the paper I'm going to talk about in a second. The Hill reported that the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, or NERC, is seeing a, quote, unprecedented level of cyber threat to the power grid. About a quarter of the 1,500 utilities in the United States sharing risk information with NERC reported some potential compromise as a result of the Russian solar winds attack that Brody just mentioned. And then the United States Department of Justice secured authority from a federal judge in Texas for the FBI to break into hundreds, I put that in air quotes because I bet it probably means thousands, of servers inside the United States. So they got a warrant from a federal judge in Texas to break into servers inside the United States to forcibly remove malware and expel hackers associated with the giant Microsoft Exchange server breaches reported earlier this year. There's two ways to look at that. One is it really does show the necessity and the value of public-private cooperation and partnerships in combating cyber warfare. On the other hand, it suggests to me perhaps a bit of constitutional overreach. And if there are any lawyers that want to talk about that, maybe we'll have a minute at the end. And finally, on a personal note, I was recently notified that I, along with thousands of others, were victims of a cyber attack on the University of California. And I have signed up for my third round of credit monitoring in 2021. Can I share my slides, please? I think
One
somebody
moment,
has-
please. Yes, let me,
Thank you.
hold on.
Yeah, it's all these different web portals. It's
Okay,
different
you
whether-
should be able to
Got it.
share right
Well,
now.
it wants me to admit someone in the waiting room.
Oh, yeah, don't do that one.
All right, let me see. Maybe I can do it now. All right, so. All right, I'm going to do the slideshow. Okay, can people see the slides?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So before getting into the meat of today's issues, I wanted to highlight the cross-disciplinary nature of the UC Irvine Cybersecurity Policy and Research Institute. Recently, in collaboration with anthropologists, we've been able to confirm that cyber attacks are actually much older than previously thought. But now for the bad news. We've been tracking at our institute 4 developments that have been underway for some time and I think are continuing that could produce a perfect storm of cyber threat to our national and economic security over the next decade, not to mention our own personal privacy. First, it's estimated that there will be 1 trillion, that's trillion with a T, devices connected to the internet by the year 2025. Why do we care about that? First of all, a huge percentage of these devices are not secure. I venture to say that your Nest thermometer at home, your smart fridge, your smart TV, unless you specifically went in and changed the security settings, the password is probably password or 1234, and these devices are all accessible from the internet. So this not only presents a threat to our privacy, but also these devices can be taken over remotely and used as a power source to attack other devices, so-called botnet attacks. And 1 trillion devices is probably 5-6 orders of magnitude larger than the number of devices available 5 years ago when bad actors were able to take down the entire internet in the country of Liberia for a couple days, much of internet services on the East Coast of the United States, including Twitter and lots of our other favorites. And if you multiply that by a factor of 10,000 or 100,000, imagine what the bad guys could do with that by 2025. Secondly, and by the way, this is my screensaver, which I use to remind myself what's at stake. Kim and Vladimir Putin and others in both world powers and rogue states and terrorist groups have obviously demonstrated that they have no compunction whatsoever about using cyber warfare against anyone, anywhere, anytime. I mentioned the power grid incursions in the United States. Homeland Security under both the prior and the current administrations have said that a huge percentage of our power grid, including as a result of the solar winds attacks, may well have little bits of code left behind that could be used in an attack. And already historically, in addition to what was done to Iran's nuclear program last week and back in 2009 or 2010 with the Stuxnet attacks, adversaries have attacked Saudi Aramco, shutting them down. They've been able to take over all the stoplights in a Texas city and change the green to red at will. They've been able to launch tornado warning sirens and much more than that. So that's the second problem is rogue leaders and terrorist groups and bad actors basically seeming not to have any inhibitions in what they're willing to do. And unfortunately, under both administrations that I served, Clinton and Bush, and then Obama and Trump, and we'll see about this administration, our leadership has been unwilling to inflict the kind of retaliatory actions against bad actors that I think might start to deter someone like this guy right here. Apologies, hopefully none of your kids are in the room. But so far, nothing has deterred him. I mean, I have to say, as a career Central Intelligence Agency officer, it kills me to admit that this guy probably pulled off the greatest intelligence operation of all time. Convincing Americans on both sides that we should be at each other's throats and increasing the divisiveness in our country. And if his goal, which it was to strategically disrupt our cohesion as a country and to convince the rest of the world that this American democracy experiment, it's been going on a while, but it turns out it's not so great after all. He could not possibly have imagined how well he would succeed beyond all of his wildest dreams, not to mention actually attacking the countries of Georgia, Ukraine, the province of Crimea, and others with cyber attacks, including ones that crippled power grid in the country of Ukraine at one point. At least 18 countries now, there's a great Council on Foreign Relations website that tracks this. At least 18 countries, including Lebanon and Ethiopia, have offensive cyber capabilities. And right now, and this is part 4 of the bad news, the rules and legal restrictions and even treaty understandings around the world around what is and what is not acceptable in cyberspace are quite literally non-existent. It is the Wild West out there. So you have massive ability of countries and organizations who even 5 or 10 years ago could not have really laid a hand on a country like the United States, metaphorically, or the United Kingdom, are now able to inflict damage at a level that only superpowers could have done 20, 25 years ago. And there's no rules to stop them, and they apparently have no inclination to be stopped. And at least so far, our government has done little to protect us against these sorts of attacks, which leads me to this. You'll recognize this is an oldie-timey map of the Caribbean. I want to draw your attention to the sea monster in the bottom right quadrant. My theory is that when maps were made back in these days, and they were largely made by government, quasi-government private partnerships, they weren't actually trying to say to the sailors that there is a sea monster at this location in the Caribbean, and if you sail there, you're going to get at by him or her. They were trying to say, we don't know what the hell's out there. And if you go into these waters, you go without our protection, you go without any ability for us to help you. And unfortunately, that's the situation I think we're all in now in modern cyberspace. I was an expert witness a few years ago in the North Korean attack on Sony in 2014. And if you think about that attack, what they did to Sony was very much like a country would conduct operations or warfare. They treated them as a sovereign government, even though they're a private company. They committed espionage against them. They committed sabotage against them. They threatened them with retaliatory action if they didn't do what North Korea wanted, which was what we in the government call diplomacy. They treated a private company as though it were a nation state, and that is without precedent in the modern age. You sort of have to go back to the days of the founding of our republic, the early 1800s, to get to a point where so much of our critical infrastructure is owned by the private sector, but the government is unwilling and unable to protect it. So we're just in a bad place where we have to try to avoid this. How do we do that? Well, I propose that the only way is if the citizens come to the rescue of their government. And as I thought of a metaphor for that, of course, this is a shot of the British Army being evacuated from Dunkirk in World War II, probably preventing the UK and potentially us from speaking German right now. And as you'll recall, or if you don't recall, you'll recall from the movie, this was not accomplished by the British Navy. They had no ability to do it. This was accomplished because the government put out a call, and thousands of private sailors and fishermen and other folks who made their living on the sea literally sailed their boats into oncoming fire by the Luftwaffe and saved that government. And so hopefully none of us have to make that dramatic sort of sacrifice. But what I want to talk about for the remainder of my time is some ways that I think we can address some of these problems. This is just a recap of what I already said. So I'm going to skip through that. The same thing here. So how do we address it? Well, I think there's a lot that all of us can do. If we run companies or NGOs or other organizations It's very important to make sure that we have our cyber act together. Because as I said, not only does that protect the privacy of your own employees and yourselves and your business secrets, and potentially protect you from public embarrassment, depending on what's in your files, it also reduces the attack surface that bad actors can go after inside the United States. So a lot of the SolarWinds attacks were not on government installations, although many of our national security agencies did get compromised. They were against any private company who had a certain sort of technology on their computer. And this is partly because a lot of cyber attacks are just automated. They're just scouring the internet for vulnerabilities, and once they find them, then they'll decide how important you are as a target. So for anyone who thinks that they're in a small business or a small organization, or even as an individual, you're not going to be targeted, you're mistaken, because they might come on to you originally only because they search the internet for vulnerabilities. But then if they see something they can use, even if it's hijacking your home computer to use it as a porno server, which happens all the time, they will come after you. So first thing, get your own house in order. Secondly, I think this is particularly salient for an organization like yours. When was the last time any of you used cybersecurity policy as an issue for vetting candidates? When was the last time, I'm sure Tom probably has done this many times, but when was the last time you asked candidates for how they were going to protect our privacy if they were elected? That's something I would suggest, especially in a state like California, should be on the list of vetting questions for candidates. Secondly, you can lobby your elected officials. There were, at last time I counted in the prior Congress, 18 different proposed cybersecurity enhancement, privacy enhancement laws. They just never went anywhere, and partly because they don't really have any organized constituency for them, and partly because the companies that would be regulated by them historically have been very resistant to that and have very powerful lobbyists. But this is starting to change. If anyone was super bored and watched the SolarWinds hearing in the Senate Intelligence Committee in January, both the president of Microsoft and the president of FireEye both said, well, reluctantly, I think it's time. We need to be regulated. We need to be forced to disclose a lot more information about cyber attacks to the government. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later, because at my institute, we've developed a draft law that would do exactly that. What else are we doing at the Institute? Well, as I mentioned, there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, ultimately millions or trillions of devices connected to the internet right now that are not secure. They're typically not manufactured to be secure, and even if they have security protections available in them, they typically get shipped with the default featuring ease of use and not security. So we've built a physical place, a cybersecurity test range at our institute in Irvine, and we already have research by professors and graduate students underway about how to identify flaws in the security of devices and to remediate them even after they've been sold. Secondly, we're building a facility and a capability to do cybersecurity breach response exercises. If you're scuba divers, you know the adage, plan your dive and dive your plan. If you've been in the military or familiar with military theory, you know the story that no battle plan survives the first shot. So my point being, companies and organizations not only need to have plans for how to prevent and respond to a cyber breach, but they need to exercise those plans. They need to test them. And we've run a couple of these at my institute already, and we've learned that the more immersive they are, the more the decision makers feel like they're in the midst of a real attack, the more valuable they are to the organization in terms of testing out their plan and trying to make it better. So we're building a facility that can surround, in a large conference room, surround decision makers with the real world simulation of attack. And we're going to start launching those exercises once we are able to be back on campus either at the end of this year or early next year. And then finally, we're working to incentivize better cyber hygiene and practices and helping try to create mechanisms for responding to catastrophic cyber attacks. And that's what I'm going to talk about for just a few more minutes. And then I'm not sure, turn it over to Tom or we can do Q&A. I'm not sure how you want to do it, but a couple things to say before I wrap up. about this research that we've done over the last couple of years. We have 2 papers that are going to be published in the fall. One of them includes a draft legislative proposal on using the insurance industry to increase our cybersecurity. And the other one looks at the effect on big data and artificial intelligence on cybersecurity and privacy. And I'll just give you a couple thoughts from these. I think it's the largest study of this type that's been done. We did, a law professor and I did 60 in-depth interviews with the entire, what I call the cyber insurance ecosystem, from brokers to underwriters to risk managers, lawyers, forensics, insure tech, entrepreneurs, data scientists. We observed a number of conferences. We analyzed 30 plus cyber policies. And then interestingly, we paid for access, thankfully at the University Friends and Family discount, to a database of more than 85,000 records of cyber events that is used by the insurance industry to try to understand risk and price policies. And we did this to test the theory that a lot of us have been hoping would come to pass over the last 5 or 10 years, that would use cyber insurance providers as ways to, without onerous regulation, nudge businesses and nudge organizations towards better cyber hygiene. And I'm sorry to report that this really hasn't worked so far as was hoped. 2020 was a wake-up call for the insurance companies, because looking at COVID, they realized all of a sudden for the first time that there really is a potential existential threat to the global insurance ecosystem, that you could have $1 trillion plus catastrophes, whether caused by climate change or by a pandemic or by a cyber attack or by a combination of things. And the entire global supply of capital for insurance is only $2 to $3 trillion. So you could easily imagine an event or a series of events. Solar winds, for example, has already been estimated to cost more than $100 billion, and it will go up from there. So you can imagine a situation where the insurance industry could literally be wiped out. Why do we care about that? Well, insurance is not the first thing on everyone's mind. And for those of us who watched the insurance industry gut the Affordable Care Act and other measures, we don't have a lot of sympathy for them. But unfortunately, the bottom line is, if they go out of business, that means millions of companies and millions of organizations are going to go out of business as well. And unlike with terrorism, there currently is no government-provided financial backstop for a cyber insurance catastrophe. And without that, cyber insurers have begun trying to get out of policies, trying to enforce exclusions in policies, trying to litigate, so that it's actually going to become, without some sort of remedy, it's going to become very difficult to get cyber insurance that's both affordable and also is not riddled with so many loopholes that it'll basically never pay out. This is unfortunately what we found in our papers. I'm conscious of not taking up too much of the time, so I'm not going to go into detail on these findings, but basically the bottom line is, on the one hand, yes, insurance companies and other players in the system have begun using technology and artificial intelligence and machine learning. Unfortunately, instead of using it to make us safer and better evaluate and price risk, it's been used much more as a way to sell more policies and to convince you that you need more insurance than you might actually need. But we're hoping to improve this. And so far, as I said, this has been largely ineffective, partly because it's such a soft market right now, the cyber insurance market, or it has been up until solar winds, that insurance companies really just wanted the business, and they were willing to underprice it, and they were willing to concede a lot of things to make the sale, hoping that if they got hit with really big claims, they would sort of screw you at the back end. They would say, well, look, you filled out this 100-question form in 2016, and we sold you a bunch of insurance really cheap, but it turns out that answer number 78 wasn't entirely accurate. So guess what? You're not covered. This is not a sustainable situation, and it's not a situation that has been successful in getting businesses to do better cyber hygiene. But this may be changing, and there may be ways to correct the situation. So it's an 80-page paper. I think there's 180 footnotes. But the real important part of it, I think, is at the end of it, we proposed the Catastrophic Cybersecurity Resilience Act. And this is actually drafted in legislative language in the paper. So a member of Congress or a senator or their staff could literally work from that and get a big step up on some sort of improvement in the situation. The TRIA, the Terrorism Reinsurance Act of 2003, confronted a situation like what we fear could happen after a catastrophic cyber attack, but on a much larger, smaller scale. So what happened after the Twin Towers were destroyed is you basically just couldn't buy cyber insurance. If you were a developer or a builder or a property owner, you just all of a sudden couldn't buy it for months after 9/11. So the government came in and passed a law. Remember when government used to pass laws and presidents used to sign it? Those were great days. Where the government would create a backstopping fund. If there was another terrorist attack, the Secretary of the Treasury could certify that it was catastrophic, and there's financial thresholds in the law. And if it met that threshold, the US government, the US Treasury, would bail out the insurance companies. One of the problems with that law, by the way, it turned out to be a very effective law in terms of rebuilding the ability to buy insurance. And thankfully, we've never had a terrorist attack since then big enough to trigger it. But one of the problems with it, from my point of view, was that it was all carrot and no stick. It basically didn't require the insurance companies to do anything to qualify for the funds other than just sell terrorism insurance. What our proposal does is it creates a much larger potential fund for a catastrophic cyber attack, but in return for having access to the funding, the insurers have to do a number of things. First of all, they have to require the companies they insure, which they don't now for the most part, to employ reasonable data protection and infrastructure security measures, and they have to enforce that on their customers. Now, it's not a regulation. You don't have to do it, but then if you don't do it, you're not going to have access to this fund. And if the insurance company wants you to, and you don't do it, you won't get the insurance. Second, it requires them to report in a timely fashion cyber attacks, breach incidents to the US government, to a special agency set up within Homeland Security to deal with that. And then the government, on the flip side, is required to take all this information they get from the companies and analyze it and combine it with the classified sources the government has, and then produce unclassified reports that will come back out and also help the insurance companies know how to better price the policies and know which types of practices work and which don't. And finally, these get a little bit technical, but there's certain kind of exclusions in cyber policies that they're now trying to assert. The most problematic one is a war exclusion. So if you look at almost any insurance policy, it will say, if the damage that you sustain is caused by a war, we don't have to cover you. And that's actually quite rational, because in a real big shooting war, there would be so much destruction and so much damage that no system of insurance could cover it. The problem is, in cyberspace, almost every type of significant attack, you could argue there will be some evidence that it was caused by North Korea or Russia or Iran or India or us in some cases. And so if that gets you out of insurance protection, then number one, it's going to kill 90% of the coverage. Number two, you're going to be in court forever litigating it. So part of what the companies have to do is they have to agree not to assert these things. And they have to agree that if the government comes out and says, as they did in 2014, President Obama came out and said, this was North Korea that attacked Sony. If the government comes out and certifies that under a number of procedures to protect people's due process rights, then the insurance companies can't fight about that. Well, I know that's all sort of boring and detailed, but that's if you want to read more about that, there'll be an 80-page paper coming out in the fall to read about it. Meanwhile, there's my contact information. If any of you want to participate with our institute, and especially if you want to be involved in any of these cyber response exercises that we're going to launch later this year, early next year, please feel free to email me and I'll put you on our distribution list. I'm happy to answer questions now or later. I don't know how you want to handle it from here on, but thank you for your attention.
You're muted, Brody.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Brian. I'm thinking we'll have Tom speak now, and then we'll take questions afterwards.
I think I've got a few questions that are targeted to Brian's presentation
Okay.
that I think would work.
Alrighty.
You hit on IoT, Internet of Things, and the fact that they're not, nobody keeps up on their security. So my question becomes, should we make the vendor or the manufacturer provide security updates for a period of time, 5, 10 years, some life cycle thing?
Well, so it's a good question. As you know, the big enterprise software companies, Microsoft and others, do provide those patches, and they, in fact, that's part of what the FBI got the court order to force on people who hadn't patched their systems. Yeah, I think that's not a bad idea.
I'm thinking of somebody like Samsung,
Right?
who on their smart TVs, which are Internet of Things, as soon as the next generation comes out, there's no longer any firmware updates for those devices.
Yeah, I was about to say, I think it's a good idea. I think the devil is in how you implement it, right? Because part of the problem is we as consumers don't want to go to the trouble of implementing our own security. So and I can tell you that the plaintiff's legal bar is waiting for a case that they can sue a Samsung or a big box retailer for having components in their systems that don't adequately protect consumers. I know they're out there because they've been calling me about being an expert witness. So I don't know whether it's better enforced with some sort of law that requires it, or creating liability for assemblers and big box companies and OEM or manufacturers to do that. Of course, consumers could demand it, right? We could vote with our wallets, but I don't have a lot of faith in us to do that.
I have a follow-on to that same idea that in 2013, Target had their point of sales network hacked, and we all ended up with brand new credit cards. Have the businesses learned anything? Have they paid enough to keep repeating it? And
No.
when will we see when would we see gas stations get rid of the terminals that support card skimming?
Yeah, it's a mess. I mean, no one's really paid. I mean, Target probably got hit the hardest, and it was obviously not a bet the company proposition for them. The problem right now with litigation as a way of trying to enforce compliance is it's so incredibly difficult with all the various compromises to prove you were damaged as an individual. And if you were to prove which breach you were damaged from, right? Like I said, I'm now on 3 credit monitorings because I've had my private information taken from 3 different sources. So suppose somebody commits identity theft to me. The University of California, and I can't even remember who the other 2 are, they're going to go into court and say, well, it wasn't me, it was the other guy. So I think we need some real meaningful legal reform around that. I don't think they've had to pay enough. And I don't know what the gas stations are going to do. Although theoretically, if the banks replace all the cards with RFID cards, they shouldn't have any need for the swipe readers anymore. Those things are not unhackable either, though.
Okay, I got one more for you. And this is in the intelligence or security realm. China engages in technology gathering. Russia engages in disinformation and targeting of and targeted campaigns against Ukraine. You covered those. North Korea targets financial crimes. And Iran is targeting our utility grids because they're actually waging war against us. Can you rank those? You know, I mean, when we watch the press and stuff, and you know, you turn on one channel, they say Russia's our biggest threat, and then you turn on somebody else, and they say it's somebody, you know, it's China and stuff. Can you rank those countries, or would you like to add another one to that list?
Well, one of the things that's been most disappointing to me over the last probably 20 years, but really 10 years, is the business of intelligence analysis has become politicized. So lots of talking heads who will go on television and say Russia is the biggest threat are saying that at least in part because they want to tar Trump with it. And likewise, on the other side, lots of the talking heads that go on TV and say China's the biggest threat are doing it because they want to distract attention from Trump's interactions with the Russians. I will tell you, with, as we used to say in the intelligence business, high confidence that by far the most dangerous cyber threat to the United States is and will be China for the next 50 years. First of all, they've invested way more resources in it than any other country, including ours. There are probably multi-million hackers in China that are in some way connected to the intelligence services, multi-million numbers of people. Now, do they all work for the Ministry of State Security and go in and click their badge in at the headquarters every day? No, but they're hackers who they're almost like privateers, like government pirates. They wear one hat to steal information and money, and then they answer to the government for purposes of intelligence collection that the government directs them to do. So first of all, numbers are on the side of China. Secondly, they've just invested massive, I don't know, trillions of dollars, probably, certainly hundreds of billions in advanced technology and capabilities to do this. And third, it is literally a part of their publicly stated national plan to become the greatest power in the world in a certain, like 20 specified industries by, I think it's 2025. They make no bones about it. They don't even try to hide it. It is espionage for the purposes of advancing their own economic interests. I'm not talking about economic interests in a governmental sense. Their private sector interests, if there is such a thing, is unabashedly part of their government's plan. So I am far more worried about China than I am any of those other countries, even though, as I said, I think because we in the United States were so willing to be fooled by propaganda on all sides for the last 10 years and to retreat into our own ideological corners and just listen to those opinions that reinforce us, Russia has so far done a lot more damage to our country than China in terms of our political dynamics. But one director of Central Intelligence, I think it was under President Obama, way back in 2013 or 14, publicly testified that what China has done to the United States in terms of intellectual property and technology theft in the last 20 years is the, quote, greatest transfer of wealth in the history of humanity, close quote.
Okay, I'll close with one last question, and that is that the not Petya the campaign that Russia waged against Ukraine, that playbook seems to have been the exact same playbook that was used against SolarWinds, and didn't have software vendors like SolarWinds, they didn't learn from that incident?
Look, I'm not going to defend SolarWinds. They got compromised in a massive way, which we still don't know or understand. It was, I think, in some ways more sophisticated than not Petya, in that they compromised a very strategically placed channel vendor. I mean, they knew they did. I think Brad Smith from Microsoft, his engineers estimated that Russia probably had 1,000 engineers working on SolarWinds before it launched. So they knew every place that SolarWinds was. They knew exactly how to compromise it so that it wouldn't be seen by the anti-malware engines of the customers. And this is maybe the most important distinction. It was entirely intentional. Not Petya was intended to only hit the Ukrainian energy and government sectors and financial sectors. But it obviously got so far out of Russia's control that it actually bounced around and hit Russian banks and Russian oil companies. So it in some ways, I could talk about this for hours. In some ways, like 9/11, it succeeded far more than its originators thought it ever could. But it was intentional against Ukraine. It wasn't intentional against the rest of our infrastructure, which SolarWinds most certainly was.
Thank you. I think that's a
I think you need to back up and tell some of us what the Ukraine event was.
Oh,
So-
it took out the
Could we
German
have-
National Railroad. It took out,
Could we
the
have
British
Brian
health
talk
system.
about it? Could we have our speaker talk about it?
There are two
What is-
Bryans.
I know, it's our
and
speaker.
we spell it the same way.
I know.
Well, in brief, it's actually been litigated whether or not the not Petya, so there's reasons called the not Petya attack, Petya, is a number of months earlier, there was a Russian sponsored malware attack that was called Petya. And this not Petya looked at first glance very much like that, but it turned out to be much more destructive. What it was a supposedly targeted attempt to compromise financial services software in the Ukraine that was used by a bunch of Ukrainian energy and governmental organizations. And the idea behind it was you compromise this financial software, all these departments and agencies use it, it gets up in their systems, and then Russia can use that to cripple Ukraine as part of their ongoing, I really don't think it's too strong a word to say war with Ukraine. So they launched this attack, and like Petya before it, it originally looked like it was just a malware attack, but really, a ransomware attack to try to lock up data, but it also was intended to destroy systems and data, which it did all across the globe. At the time, it was by far the largest cyber attack that had been recorded. SolarWinds is the Russian-sponsored compromise of SolarWinds is a company that makes software that helps you update your other software. So that attack was, I think, quite strategically intended to get into and burrow deep into thousands and thousands. I think the last number I saw was 18,000 corporate and government systems, principally, but not exclusively in the United States, for purposes that are still unknown. The worst fear, which I tend to subscribe to because I'm a pessimist by training, is that they wanted to do some damage now, but what they really wanted was to be in these systems deep enough so that if there ever was more of a real war, or if a future president wanted to challenge Putin about something like going into the Ukraine or Crimea or Poland, the Russians could say, guess what? You stop us and we're going to switch off all your systems. That's my worst fear. And I think we still don't know the extent of the infection and the damage from SolarWinds. I think it's going to be years before we figure it out, and hopefully we're able to eradicate it, but I'm not super confident about that.
Didn't it get into the United States systems too? I mean,
Oh yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. It
and
was,
then the government, our whole government and military.
yeah, that was part of its target. I might get this slightly wrong because I don't have the list in front of me, but it was in the Department of Defense, a number of our intelligence agencies, Department of Energy, the State Department, probably the White House National Security Systems too. And again, like, we probably don't even know everywhere that it is to this day.
Someone asked in chat, is anyone besides Estonia using blockchain as security?
Short answer is I don't know. I'm sure there are lots of countries looking at it. I know our Department of Energy is looking at it. I personally think blockchain is not remotely mature or secure enough now to make that a viable option. But Estonia is pretty smart about this stuff. I mean, they got massively, they were one of the earliest victims of Russians' cyber warfare. So they've done a lot of really innovative things. For example, they have something that I think is a great idea, but I don't think our culture in the United States would permit it. They actually have a cyber national guard. So IT and security people in private companies in critical infrastructure, 2 weeks a year, put on a uniform, go serve in the armed forces, get the training, come back and serve the rest of the time in the private company. But there ever is a real declaration of emergency, they can immediately be called up into government service at the companies where they're working. And that's a problem that we're going to have to confront, because 85% of all the critical infrastructure in the United States remains owned and operated by the private sector. And as I said at the beginning, our government so far is either unwilling or unable to protect that private capability. Now, to be fair, there's a lot of blame to go around for that. I mean, a lot of it has to do with, and I've done a lot of work over the last decade or so with a lot of privacy and civil liberties organizations, ACLU, EFF, CDT, and others. And there is a very powerful lobby. And interestingly enough, this tends to actually merge up progressives like Ron Wyden with, I don't know what you call them, not progressives like Rand Paul. Very strong inclination against allowing the US government into private company systems. And for some good reasons and for some not so good reasons, in my opinion. Also, the companies hate it, right? Because they don't want the government in there messing around and in their worry finding, corporate malfeasance or tax issues or whatever else, and or compromising their intellectual property. So there's a host of reasons why I don't think that's going to work in the United States, but it's worked well in Estonia. So even though I'm not enthusiastic about blockchain right now, I wouldn't count it out if Estonia is using it.
Interesting. Okay. Tom, are you ready? We can have you next and more questions for both speakers. Do you want to stop screen?
Let's do it.
There you go. Okay.
Hey, can you guys see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so let's, Brian, that was great. So I'm going to shift a little gears and talk about stuff that you guys can do to better protect yourself. I'm going to get pretty concrete. And it was interesting, we've talked a lot about SolarWinds, and I have friends that work at SolarWinds, and so it may be esoteric, but because you're like, well, they sell to other businesses, and the product that was hacked was the software update mechanism for that network management product, et cetera. But the reality is, in the last few weeks, there have been some major hacks involving your data. Geico, that your driver's license, if you have Geico, that your driver's license information was exposed for over a month. Over 500 million, Facebook accounts, including phone numbers, were scraped and leaked online. There was a dating service, same thing with LinkedIn. And then Brian referenced a company called Excellion, which I'm familiar with. It's a file sharing company. And my son got a letter. He is a freshman in college. He applied to UCs, he applied to Colorado, and what the University of Colorado said that Excellion was hacked, and just like Brian, I'm going to sign my son up for credit monitoring. And just the other day, we were talking about Russia, North Korea. The New Yorker has this big article in this week's issue, and they don't have millions, but they have estimated over 7,000 people just focused on hacking, et cetera. So what can we do, or what should you do? And the first thing what I want to get across is I want you guys to understand what are the top attack vectors that hackers are using. And then the second thing I want to do is that they're going after valuable data. I mean, so in the case of nation states, oftentimes they're going after intellectual property, military plans, et cetera. But hackers are also going after your personal information, your financial information, your healthcare information. So the second thing is that what's really important is to minimize the amount of digital exhaust that we have floating out there on the internet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first talk about how the hackers are going about attacking you. And then I'm going to talk about how you can reduce your overall footprint of data that could potentially be stolen out there. So let's talk about the top of attack vectors. It turns out we as humans and our corresponding digital identities is the top attack vector. So if you actually look at the various hacks that happen, it turns out that stolen credentials are used in 80% of all web attacks, right? And so, as much as, obviously, malware, ransomware takes advantage of out-of-date software. There's holes in the software, et cetera. But frankly, it's so much easier just to, for example, send John Podesta an email saying your Gmail account has been hacked. Click here to change your password, right? And that's how he got hacked, right? So, and phishing is actually involved in 25% of all breaches, that it emanates from actual phish credentials. The second area besides phishing is the fact that you and I oftentimes we share our passwords across multiple websites. So if one gets hacked and they steal the password, they just go out and replay that password on thousands of other websites. Or you and I may have weak passwords, password 123, et cetera. And shame on the websites that allow those weak passwords, but not all websites enforce strong password. And the fact is that there's just this common set of passwords that can be easily guessed, which is another top way that hackers steal our credentials. So how do you protect your digital identity, right? So here's some practical things that you can do. So first of all, find out if your information has actually been hacked. And there's various free services. And the first one is, have I been pawned? Okay. And with the latest Facebook hack, they actually can now allow you to put in your phone number. But if you put in your email and you go to this website, it will actually tell you where your personal information has been caught up in various hacks that at least this website knows about. The second thing you can do is you can have a note, you can click on the notify me. And so if they, in terms of Troy Hunt, who runs this website, as he crawls the dark webs for these caches of stolen information, he loads them up into his database, that if your account tied to your email has been caught up in any of these new breaches, you'll get immediately notified. And so oftentimes you actually may find out that your data has been taken or stolen from some site that you may not have directly interacted with, that your data may have been sold from one site to another. The second thing you can do is you can avoid reuse of passwords. So use variations on a theme, to remember the password, but don't have the exact same password, or use a password manager. But probably the thing that I'm the biggest proponent of is something that people sometimes call two-factor authentication, or it's called multi-factor authentication. So say, what is this? What does this mean? So think of your ATM card. You go to the bank and there's something that you physically have, right? And that's the actual card. And so if you put it in there, the card by itself doesn't work. You have to have a PIN, which is something that you know. So if I were to tell you that my ATM card PIN is 873657, which it isn't, that does you no good because you don't have the card. Or if I were to give Brody my ATM card, it wouldn't do her that much good as well. So most websites actually allow you to sign up for multi-factor authentication. So if someone were to even steal your password because it's weak or it's been caught up in a breach, you have that extra protection. And in fact, there are free MFA apps like Google Authenticator that a lot of websites support, which actually provide even better protection than getting an SMS text. But SMS is better than having nothing. Obviously, because our information has been caught up in these breaches, and people out there, the bad guys, know your emails, they're going to try to phish you. And because millions of phone numbers have been caught up, just lately, probably you and I have been getting a lot of texts lately that say something like, your package delivery is delayed, click on this link right here. You get that text. Don't do it, right? Go directly to the corresponding websites itself, or within your email, hover over the actual link. Even then, it's kind of tricky because the hackers sometimes it looks like it's a US bank or Wells Fargo, but it's actually a different domain as well. And then only enter your credentials on websites that have HTTPS, that are secure websites. But last, and probably something that we overlook, is that when people are asking for confidential information, or you get an email saying that your credit card has been hacked, click here, etc., it's perfectly okay to pick up the darn phone and call, right? Not everything needs to be done online or emailed, etc. And oftentimes you'll actually call someone and say, are you really requesting my social security number? Why are you requesting that, etc.? And then you may find that they were like, oh, actually, that wasn't me sending that email, etc. So you are the top attack vector. They want your identity, your digital identity, and then they will then take your information and run with it, okay? The second attack vector is out-of-date software. And again, this is secondary to your credentials, but hackers are actively finding vulnerabilities in software all the time. And this leads to malware, and what's growing pretty dramatically is ransomware, where they actually, the hackers will encrypt your entire hard drive, and you have to pay them to be able to unlock. And in fact, ransomware has become as a service that developers of ransomware will build this service and lease it to other hackers to actually use it. So and they even provide technical support to the other hackers for the ransomware that they're building. So the key thing is update your software, and preferably turn on auto updates. Sounds obvious, but have you actually checked to see if your software is up to date on your phone, your PC, your Mac? And there are a lot of good free stuff like Malwarebytes that I would highly recommend that you can run both on your phone and PC. But probably the most important thing is that your data, especially when it comes to ransomware, just assume someone's going to go in there and corrupt it, they're going to encrypt it, etc. You need to back it up. And in the old days, you would have to buy like a backup drive, hook it in, you would have to like manually do it, or you schedule it. And then when the backup drive was actually connected to your PC, and then your PC got infected, it would then find as a file share your backup drive, and then it would blow it away, or it would encrypt it as well. The good news is that most of the file sharing cloud file systems like a Dropbox, they all support snapshots. And so, for example, Dropbox Basic, the basic program, can actually recover versions of files within the last 30 days. So if your data, your hard drive, has malware or has ransomware, then basically you can junk that PC if you've backed everything up to the cloud, and then you can go there and Dropbox and say, get yesterday's snapshots of all the files, etc. So that is how you can protect yourself in terms of going against malware and ransomware. Okay, so those are the practical things you can do. At the very least, if you haven't learned anything, go to this website called Have I Been Pawned, put your email address in there, and then see if you've been caught up in any breaches. And if you have been, immediately change the password on those websites and click the notify me. But I highly recommend all your banking applications, your healthcare applications, to absolutely turn on multi-factor authentication, because even if they steal your password, they still can't get into your account, okay? And then, of course, back everything up to Dropbox, Box, OneDrive, Google Drive, whatever, because they create snapshots. And so if something bad happens, you can just throw away that phone, throw away that PC, and you can restore it from the cloud. But the reality is there's still too much of our data out there that could be stolen, okay? And luckily, as Californians, we are in a super unique situation that we have two laws that let us take control over our personal information. A law that just kicked in this year, and it was championed by Ed Chow, Assemblyman Ed Chow, is called the Data Broker Registry Law. So what are data brokers? Data brokers are organizations that you actually, they're not Facebook, they're not Google, you don't interact directly with them, but their business model is to capture and collect as much data about you as possible, and they sell that data to other companies as well. Only 2 states in the United States have data broker laws. It's Vermont and it's California. And data brokers have to register with both states. And in the case of California, they have to document how you can actually go about determining if they have data on you, how you go about deleting it, etc. It's manual, but at least there's a place where you know who the data brokers are and how you can contact each one individually. Unfortunately, there's not a consistent way going about. Some say send us an email, some say fill out this form, etc. But at least you know who the data brokers are that are active in California. Or you can go to the Vermont website, you can see there. The second law that we have is the California Consumer Privacy Act, or CCPA. That was passed in 2018 and it kicked in 2020, okay? It is the most comprehensive privacy law in the United States. And in the last election, we actually, as voters, amended it and upgraded it via a Proposition 24 called the California Privacy Rights Act. CPRA was based by the same people that wrote the CCPA, the original CCPA, and it adds additional property rights. So let's talk about how we can take advantage of these laws to minimize your digital exhaust that is floating out there. And as it relates to data brokers, again, these are companies that you probably haven't heard of, and they make billions of dollars selling your data. The world's largest data broker is a company called Axiom. They advertise, if you go to their website, that they have data on 2.5 billion people in the world. And they say that they have 10,000 bits of information about each and every one of us. They know, look at that, they have 45 years of historical data on name changes in residential. They aggregate credit card purchase information. They know your political views. They know if you're having a family, you know, the health interest, etc. In fact, Senator Wyden actually has a proposed bill that would limit the ability for data brokers to sell this information to foreign governments, because this could actually be used against us. And so that's just, but that's an example of someone even looking at this from the federal basis. So how do we know who the data brokers are out there? So you can just Google California Data Broker Registry. You go to this website right here, and it has, you can see the submissions as I show in the screenshot right here of the various data brokers out there. And then you can click the view full submission. Now you're saying to me, Tom, there's over 400 data brokers that have registered here. It would be very painful. Now there are some free services out there. You can type data broker deletion vendors that they expect some money, but they can kind of automate this. But the key thing is, you can just focus on the top 4 or 5, and I would start with Axiom. Go to, how do I delete my information from Axiom should be the next Google search you do. Oracle bought a company, and it's called the Oracle Data Cloud. You may be familiar with white pages. Like, how do they know all that information when you Google yourself and you see Spokio white pages been verified? You probably want to get that information off the internet as well. So if you just focus on, say, Axiom, white pages, Spokio, and follow the directions, and they have to provide those directions because that is part of the law, the California Data Broker Registry law, that will reduce the data footprint. They will stop selling your data, and this is the type of data that they have about you. And this type of data can actually be used by hackers to kind of figure out what your passwords are or where you actually have accounts on which websites and et cetera. Okay, the other thing is, my build doesn't work, is that we have certain privacy rights with the California Consumer Privacy Agency. Ignore the one in the lower right-hand corner. Let's talk about the one up in my upper left-hand corner. CCPA gives you the right to know. First of all, CCPA only applies to for-profit businesses greater than 25 million. It doesn't apply to government agencies. It doesn't apply to nonprofits. But if it's a business that's greater than $25 million, they have to provide a privacy statement, and you have the right to contact them and ask them what data do they have about you. They have to do that. That's the law, okay? So you have the right to know what Facebook, Google. Now, CCPA deals with companies that you directly interact with. Remember, data brokers, you don't directly interact with data brokers. They're just buying and selling and sucking up information from other sources and building a digital voodoo doll of you with 10,000 different attributes, right? But these are companies, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, whoever you interact with, banks, et cetera, that do business in California greater than 25 million. You have the legal right to contact them and say, tell me, what data do you have on me, okay? The second thing is that you can tell these businesses that you cannot sell my information. Because the interesting thing is that a lot of these businesses, especially startups in the tech business, that they offer a free service, maybe it's a healthcare app, right? Then they take that data and then they sell it to a data broker who then, creates a even bigger digital voodoo doll of you up in the cloud. So you can tell companies that not only do I want to know what data you have on me, but you actually, I'm going to tell you, you cannot sell my data as well. And CCPA gives you the right to delete, okay? You can tell them, delete my data, okay? And so the cool thing is that if you're no longer using a service, say hey, I'm sick of Twitter, I want to get off. Yes, you can close down your account, but you can also contact them and say, if there's any personal information you have about me, get rid of it. And then finally, I didn't do this build properly in this PowerPoint right here. It's against the law for any of these businesses to discriminate against you if you exercise these other rights. They can't say, oh, well, if you're telling me to opt out of, selling of my information, I'm going to charge you for that. That's discrimination. Okay. So those are the type of rights that you have right now. So you have the right to go to data brokers and tell them, who you don't interact with directly, to delete my information, et cetera. And then the businesses that you do interact directly, they have to tell you exactly what data they have about you. You can tell them don't sell it, and you can have them delete it as well. And then this law that we just passed this November, Prop 24, the California Privacy Rights, it's version 2 of CCPA. It gives you additional privacy rights. It gives you, for example, an additional privacy right is the right to correct your data. Now, why is that important? But what if you, in your exercising your right to know, you find that they have bad data about you, like your bank has incorrect information about you, that may impact your ability to get a loan, for example. So you have the right to say, you've got bad data about me or incorrect data. And so this law gives you the ability to actually tell these people to fix my data inside the system, because bad data can actually have a negative impact on your ability to get financing, a loan, et cetera. You also, now the clever thing is that a lot of these businesses, oh, okay, we won't sell your information, which means we won't collect any information, but they may have like marketing agreements where they share the information, but then they somehow they make money other ways by sharing your information. it's kind of a blurred line between selling and sharing with these tech companies. But now with Prop 24, you have the right to say, do not sell or share my data with anyone, okay? And then Prop 24 adds the ability to limit use of the most sensitive personal information that you can really, like, sensitive information is your sexual preference, your religion, union membership. It also includes precise geolocation. You can get people not to track you as part of Prop 24 because they know exactly if you're going to, if you're going to a doctor's office, et cetera, they have that data. You can limit the use of them, tech companies and websites being able to use that data. And then finally, Prop 24 extends the ability to see all your data. The current law in CCPA, right to know, they have to provide the information. They only have to provide the last 12 months of information. This says, this law, Prop 24 amends CCPA to say, no, you got to show me all the data. And so Prop 24, the CPRA, which is version 2 of CCPA, will become effective in 2023. So the key thing is that stop the main attack vectors and limit your digital amount of data that you have floating out there. And therefore, those are probably the best two ways that you guys can use to protect yourself. So if you want to learn more, I'm on Twitter, TomKemp00. Feel free to follow me. I have a blog that I blog about cybersecurity and privacy. It's tomkemp.blog. So hopefully this is some practical tips that you guys can use to make yourselves more secure and kind of builds on the good stuff that Bryan talked about. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. And so we can open up for questions if anyone has anything.
Yes,
I have a
thank
couple
you.
of questions for Tom.
Sure.
First one is that Epic Games with their Fortnite lawsuit, is this an antitrust lawsuit or is it a threat to cybersecurity? Because basically if they win, then Apple and Google will no longer be able to ban insecure applications from distribution. So this seems to go counter to everything that the CC whatever the act
CCPA, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, I don't know the details of that, to be candid. So, but the good news is that Apple is, I mean, a lot of people are Apple fans, and they're much more pro privacy. I think part of that is their culture, but also it's that they understand that their competitors, Google and Facebook, their competitors' business model is buying and selling and using your personal data, while the business model of Apple is selling devices as well. So what Apple is doing, so I can't talk about specifically Fortnite, I'm not as familiar with that, but I do want to talk about a couple things that Apple is doing. And so the first thing is that Apple is going to require developers to publish a privacy nutrition label. So and that's going to happen really soon. And so if a app provider puts themselves in the Apple store, that they have to put somewhere a nutrition label as it relates to privacy. And so that provides a significant amount of transparency that you can actually see for specific apps, what data that they're collecting about you. The second thing Apple's doing, and I think it's kicking in I think sometime this week, is that when you install the actual app, if the app shares information and tracks you, that the app has to pop up a little box that says, hey, do you want us to allow tracking? Do you want us to allow, you want our app to allow you to track across all the websites? The reality is most people are going to say no to that, right? And so Facebook is freaking out about that. And Apple is bringing that forward because that will limit the amount of information that Facebook collects about what you're doing on other websites as well. So there are a bunch of key privacy related things that Apple are doing, but I just don't know enough about, there's just so many antitrust lawsuits going on. It's hard to keep up with them. So Brian, I apologize, I don't know about that, but there are some cool things that you guys can take advantage. The privacy nutrition label that Apple's doing. And then the second thing is that yes, click, do not allow this app to track me across different websites.
That's the information I was trying to get from you. So that's a good answer.
Great.
Following Tom's presentation, there was a 2018 movie called Searching, and the plot was the father was searching for his daughter who went missing, and it was all the ways that he used, and he was a Silicon Valley person supposedly,
Yeah.
and all the ways that he used his daughter's social media accounts to finally find out what did happen to her.
Yes.
And so if you don't understand what Tom's been talking about, you can watch the movie and go, oh yeah, now I see what what some of those people are talking about.
Hey, Brian, I'm going to add something. There's another on Netflix, The Social Dilemma. Amazing.
Oh, right.
Okay. And I highly recommend. And then some of the words and expressions like that voodoo doll, I got that from The Social Dilemma. Right. I got to, I've interacted with some of the people that were interviewed in the movie, the experts, et cetera. That is really the key eye opener. It really freaks you out in terms of, like we're getting these notifications on our phone because they're trying to hook us. Like, go back and check Instagram. There's a reason why they want you to check Instagram all the time, right? So I'm also a big proponent of turning off notifications. At least have your kids turn off, or your grandkids turn off notifications at 10 o'clock at night to 7 o'clock in the morning. That will give you much more sleep.
Okay, I have one more question that I'm going to pitch that either you or Brian can work on. Basically, all business operations have some level of acceptable loss or errors. Businesses fight shoplifting, credit card companies accept a certain level of uncollected data or debt. Amazon accepts a certain level of porch pirates.
Yep.
What level should we expect from voting systems? 0.1% loss?
None.
0.01%?
I mean, none. I mean, obviously, Elizabeth Warren, that was a big part of her platform right there in terms of voter security. Obviously, I haven't looked at SB1, but there were, trying to have paper ballots associated with it and be able to do that. So my personal opinion is that it shouldn't be tolerated. And the good news is that I think we all very much know that 2020 was a very clean election, and Trump's own people said it was very clean as well. But what's happening in terms of voter suppression, the various laws, we have to fight, get HR1, SB1, across the goal line, because a lot of that, involves not only, stopping gerrymandering, voter suppression, et cetera, but we need a piece of paper that comes out, with every vote right there, so we can count it as well. So we as a society cannot accept, what the Republicans are doing, and we need accountability to stop the potential of hackers getting into our voting system. There was another HBO, documentary about, potential threats to our voting system. Very scary.
Brian, do you have any comment along that topic?
Well, if I understood the question correctly, I thought it was what level of, maybe I just misunderstood. I thought it was if we were to move to electronic voting or some new voting systems, what level of error should we be willing to accept? If that's the question, I guess I have a slightly different answer than Tom, because I think if we try to hold any voting system to a standard of perfection, we'll never move to any new technology. I think the question should be, is a new voting technology more accurate and more secure than what's being used now? I'm sure you guys all remember 2000 and the hanging chads. I'm not sure. Right now, electronic voting machines and electronic voting is not ready. And to comment on one thing Tom said, actually, Orange County company silence after the 12 or 16 election, they literally went on eBay and they bought a used District of Columbia voting machine. So first of all, think about that. The government of the District of Columbia decided to sell on eBay their old voting machines. They acquired this voting machine, and it was almost child's play to hack it. And once it was hacked, not only would the vote be reversed electronically, so in that case, I'm not sure, I can't remember the exact details of what they did, but let's say, in 2012, you voted for Obama, it switched your vote to Romney, but the paper backup that came out of the machine to be a check on the electronic record also was switched. So my only point is, I think we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I mean, there's plenty of flaws in paper ballots too. And again, I don't think we're ready for prime time yet, but I know the Los Angeles and the Orange County election officials have done a lot to develop their own technology, which probably isn't ready because they didn't use it in 2020. But at some point, we're going to have to. It's insane that we can go manage our bank accounts electronically, but we can't vote electronically, to me.
I agree with you, Brian. And the thing is that the banks know that their system isn't perfect, and they accept a small loss to be able to stay in business. And I think your point is the one that I was driving for, and that is that zero is not an answer, because we will never have a system that works, because nobody will ever be able to prove that it was zero.
Yeah, to me, the most important thing to build into any future electronic voting system is the ability for the voter themselves to go online within, let's say, 12, 24 hours of their vote, type in a unique username and password or whatever, use biometrics or some sort of authentication, and be able to see not just the paper receipt. I do agree with Tom that that's a good thing, but to be able to see that the vote that the election board thinks they made is the actual one they made. And if it's not, some way to go back and petition to get it changed, even though it's 12 or 18 or 24 hours after the election. We should be able to police it ourselves.
Yeah. I'm done. Brody, you can.
We have a question by Carol Ree. Would you like to unmute yourself, Carol, and ask your question?
Yes, I've signed up for everything as paperless, bank statements and so forth, and I pay all my bills with online. Should I go back to doing everything with, stamps and envelopes?
No, just take those online accounts and make sure that you don't have the same password across all of them. Make sure that that password is not easily guessed, but turn on multi-factor authentication. And preferably, if some of those websites support a MFA app called like Google Authenticator, use that. But I, been a cybersecurity CEO. I've spoken a lot of places. There's a thing called CEO fraud, where people try to fool people in my company that I'm telling them to wire money, etc. So I've been targeted hundreds of times. I have a whole folder in my past life of emails trying to fool people in my organization. But as long as you have multi-factor authentication, preferably a stronger one than just SMS text, and you're not sharing the password, etc., you should be fine.
Thank you.
Brian, Brian.
Look, I just want to strongly reinforce that. I think that that's the most important takeaway from tonight. Multi-factor authentication is not bulletproof. There are ways, if you're very sophisticated and you're targeting an individual person and you have an inside track to the phone companies, there are ways to beat it, but it's damn near foolproof. I mean, it's very, very good. And it's not only good at preventing an attack against you, it's really good at detecting it. So my old law firm represented Glenn Simpson of Trump dossier authorship fame. And the day after we filed a pleading publicly in the court record saying that we represented that company, we started getting massively attacked by Russia. And so I'd already had all my lawyers and staff had multi-factor authentication on their law firm account, but I directed them to put it on their personal email accounts as well. And sure enough, about 3 weeks later, one of my young lawyers got a text on her phone that was the 6-digit PIN for her to reset her Yahoo password, except she hadn't made a request to reset her Yahoo password. So that meant that someone had her username and her real password and had logged into her account and wanted to make a change, and the multi-factor authentication is the only thing that not only stopped them, but alerted her to the fact that it was going on.
I think just take a look at your ATM card. Unless someone kidnaps you, puts a gun to your head, drives you to the bank and says, put your card in and give me the PIN, or puts a gun to your head and said, give me your card, give me your PIN number, etc. I mean, so multi-factor authentication is something you know, which is your password, and something that you have, which is your phone that receives a text or has the Google Authenticator as well. So it's very rare to have people absconding with your debit card and your PIN, etc. So it would be equally as rare if you leverage multi-factor authentication.
Thank you. Ray, you have a question?
I first of all, I just want to say thank you to both Brian and Tom. I thought the presentations were excellent, and they reinforce what I'm forced to take training classes about 5 times a year at my employ. But the one question I have primarily for Tom is I thought it was implicit in what you presented that you trust cloud storage of our data. And I'll just say up front, my bias is I agree with some of my colleagues in security that they hate it because not only do you give your data away, you give your security away.
Yeah,
so you mentioned backing up all your data in the cloud.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good, again, that's why, especially with Dropbox, you should definitely have multi-factor authentication. And then Dropbox does have the ability to actually encrypt the data as well. So the technology has moved forward. And so I actually probably think it's better. I personally use all my data is up in Dropbox, right? Oh. And it's secured, it's encrypted up there. And I prefer that because I know my kid's going to borrow my PC here. There's going to be some malware. There's going to be some 0-day vulnerability that hits that there's nothing that I could have done to update Microsoft Windows or Google Chrome, etc. And all of a sudden, I'm going to have this message saying, if you want your files, send me X number of Bitcoins, right? And what I would do is then basically take that PC and then, take a sledgehammer and then buy a new PC and then take the data from Dropbox. That's me personally, right? Yeah. And there's just, in the old days, we bought those external drives that we just always left plugged in. We set up backups to back everything up. But then what happens is that if you get malware or ransomware, it sees that the device is actually connected, and it blows away that data or encrypts that data from a ransomware as well. So I don't know. I would go with some of the modern technology, but damn well make sure that you're fully protecting that data that you have in the cloud, you know, a Dropbox or whatever with multi-factor authentication. There are options that are available to have that data encrypted.
What about OneDrive? My computer's always asking me if I want to put things in OneDrive. Is that pretty secure or not?
Depends on the underlying, you know, your OneDrive is, I think that's Microsoft. Right? That depends on how well you secure your Microsoft account, right? And then what options, I mean, I pay for like the premium version of Dropbox because it provides some extra security capabilities, right? Including, as I talked about in my presentation, the premium version actually does captures file changes, right? The versions for 120 days versus the basic version that does it for 30 days as well. So, you know, I would, you know, take a look at OneDrive. Do they provide extra security? You know, blah, 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 right? Okay. So you just, you know, you have to watch that, look at it.
Thank you. Ellis and Sharon, do you have a question?
I have a question. How do we know who the bad guys are? I had a situation last week that I was watching YouTube and it said, find out the side effects of some medicine that I happen to be taking, except for one thing. The only ones that knew that I was taking this medicine are me and Kaiser. And suddenly it appeared on YouTube out of the clear blue.
Yeah.
And I'm not so sure that Google isn't eavesdropping on us. In fact, I'm very sure that they are. And every time that we do a search, they get another data point for me.
Yes.
And part of it is I saw the movie on Cambridge Analytica about the 2016 election, how they had 4,000 data points on every voting American. And their COO admitted that she went to Moscow and gave him that data, probably on some kind of large thumb drive. But the real question is, how do we know who the bad guys are? Amazon has been accused of knowing who all the customers are for everything. So when they find out that there's a large market for a particular kind of can opener, Amazon gets in that can opener business. Mm-hmm. And how did they find it out? The can openers were being bought from some other company through the Amazon, website. So how do we know who the bad guys are and who's doing the most damage? As far as I can tell, Google and those have done more damage to us than the Koreans, the Russians, and the Chinese.
Well, yeah, I mean, you take a look at, like the Russians just used the services of Facebook. And look at what they did. So, I mean, it's very easy for bad actors to take advantage of that, right? And that's why we're coming forth with privacy laws, right? And luckily, California, we have the best one in the CCPA, and we've upgraded it with the CPRI. So what's happening is that Google knows what you're searching for, and they are then sharing that information and allowing people to advertise off that information, right? That's their business model, right? And so what you need to do is you can tell Google, not with your California privacy rights, you can tell Google not to sell your information. Now, Google actually has these relationships where they actually share the information. In the end, they make back end. And in 2023, you can also say, don't share that information as well. You can also use like the Brave internet browser, which won't track you and won't track what you're doing. So there are browsers that are good for that. You can also use personal VPNs if you're really concerned about the surveillance, where Comcast, AT&T sells all the internet traffic going through, and they know exactly, and you can circumvent that by using a personal VPN as well. So there are tools and technologies out there, personal VPNs, ad blockers, and
But the
other
question
technologies.
was, how do we know who the bad guys are?
Well, it's surveillance. It's surveillance capitalism. That's what, there's a book by Shoshana Zuboff.
I'm sure.
And governments are doing it, and private industry is doing it. And the scary thing is when the bad guys use the private industry to do things like what Russia did with Facebook as well. So there's a lot of bad stuff. You want to limit your data footprint out there. That's the key thing. Limit it.
Except for Flickr, huh?
Thank you.
I have a question for Bryan Cunningham. Are you still there, Bryan? Oh, shoot. Okay, well, then Tom, one thing we haven't mentioned tonight is our own government. So right now, federal agencies have access to your moment-to-moment location data. They get this in part from the apps you download on your phone or tablet, sometimes as innocuous as a flashlight app, can access and sell your data to various actors. But one of the most alarming examples of this is the revelation that the US military has been extracting location data from a Muslim prayer app to survey the Muslim community. So this kind of tracking is just an abuse of power and violation of our Fourth Amendment. And I think Senator Wyden has introduced a bill that would stop this practice and others like it in their tracks. It's called the Fourth Amendment is Not for Sale Act. But I mean, we have to be aware of our own government from viewing our data, correct?
Absolutely. And so I wrote a blog post last August on this. I know exactly what you're talking about right here. And so the good news is that help is on the way for Californians in the form of the additional rights that we get under the CPRA, version 2 of the CCPA, which you can actually explicitly tell app providers to limit and block the use of sensitive personal information, which includes your precise geolocation. In addition, that starting very soon in the Apple Store, that the privacy nutrition label apps need to tell you if they're tracking that type of privacy information. So things are going to get better. And thank God we're in California where we have
Why is
laws.
Ellis wearing a hat?
I don't sign any
Hides his
petitions or
face.
anything online.
Wait. We have some background noise. Everyone mute yourself if you're not asking a question.
Great. Any other questions? So I know you guys got some other business. So
Any other questions? Let me see. So if I don't really have any apps, okay, how are they going to be able to get the information? Or is it only from the apps, the location data?
no, you get it from your PC. You know if you're
Right.
doing Google searches, etc. And so maybe if you're really that worried about it, there's like for searches, use DuckDuckGo. Right, that's an example of search that doesn't sell your search information. Use the Brave browser that also stops. So there are privacy centric means that if you feel you're being abused in terms of your privacy, take advantage of those. And then pretty soon you'll have the rights to stop the sharing of your data. Now you can stop the selling of your data, but you'll be able to stop the sharing of data, and you will be able to limit the use of your geolocation as well. That will be in 2023. So we got another year and a half or year and 3/4 before that kicks in, but that will kick in.
Brody, I have a question for Tom.
Sure.
I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the use of an external hard drive versus backing up your data on the cloud.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's pros and cons. The external hard drive is something that you have, right? And you can put it into a safe or a lockbox, etc. It's also something that you can lose, right? Or it can be destroyed in a fire. And then if you just leave it plugged into your PC or Mac, it becomes a visible file share, right? It's like the D drive or E drive, etc. And if you get malware or ransomware, it will attack that thumb drive or that additional hard drive that you use for backup as well. And so I used to use, to back up my data, I had this big thick box that I plugged in right there. I would always forget to schedule the backup, or my computer was down when the midnight backup happened and all that stuff. And I was like, this is, and then I also knew that when it was attached, it could get wiped away as well. So I feel confident enough right now as a cybersecurity CEO to back my data up into the cloud, but only with a service that has the features that I think will provide a high level of security, which if you're super sensitive about things, that includes encrypting that data.
I have a question. When I use Malware bikes,
yes,
and it scans my computer, and it goes through in about like 20 seconds, and I have like 30,000 photos. It can't possibly go. It's not going through everything. So how do I know what what is it going through and what it's not going through everything?
It looks at, I mean, the files themselves will have, they won't be bad. I mean, they quickly go through little meta information associated with the file, as opposed to going through each byte, et cetera.
Sure.
So the technology is greatly improved. Like remember in the old days when we had antivirus, you would fire it up and like 10 hours later, it would finally finish and it would crank through each one. But the technology like Malwarebytes has gotten a lot smarter, and it's quite good. But what I would also recommend is run Malwarebytes, which is free, but also maybe get a free version of AVG or something else and like run multiple ones in case one has a gap right there. But
what's AVG?
AVG, that's a company, AVG. It has a free antivirus.
Okay.
I run, those are the ones I run, but there's other free AV out there, and they're good. They're
When
really
you
good.
run these, do they look at things that are on the cloud too, or just on your computer?
Just on the cloud, but if you want to set them up to look at, if you want to allow your cloud drive to look like a physical drive, you could have them scan your cloud drive as well. Depends on how you set up your cloud drive. If it looks like just another drive on your computer right there. The good news is that the cloud, it keeps constant backups and version control of your files as well. So if things were to get corrupted, you can restore the good version.
Okay. Do we have any more questions? Well, thank you, Tom, so much. And we thank Bryan. He had to sign off early, but
Okay.
This
Yeah.
has been so enlightening. And thank you for your time and your presentation.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Well, thank you, folks, and we'll keep up the good fight. So
Yeah, we'll
right.
come look at your blog.
All right, thanks. Take care, guys.
Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was excellent.
Oh, good.
This is Ray. I'm curious, Ellis, you're wearing a really cute hat, but I can't see your face. Now, if imitation is the only true form of flattery, does that mean I have to start wearing a hat to these Zoom
Yes.
meetings?
You're actually wearing a bridge.
But okay, but because I have a nice hat too. I could wear that if that's like supposed to be a trend.
That's how we know
I-
who he is.
That's how
Yeah,
people
everybody
know
knows
who
Ellis.
I am.
Ellis,
Otherwise we might not know. Okay,
Ellis, that the hat provides a shadow, so we can't see your
that's
face.
what I'm saying. It's
That's what he was saying.
hard to see your face. Much better. Okay, now I'm
Okay.
good.
Okay.
Although I think next time I'm going to wear that hat because I have one similar to that.
Oh, I want to let everyone know our speaker in May is Eric Swalwell.
Oh,
Hey, yay.
Good.
Yeah, he's in DC. So he wants to start early, and we're going to start our meeting at 6 so that he can come on at 9 o'clock his time in DC.
Right.
So anyway, and I'm not sure who the others, we're going to have another speaker there too, since it'll only be for
We're
about
having Eric
45
next
minutes.
time, too.
Does anyone have any ideas for speakers? I was thinking about having people talk, someone from the redistricting commission. Would that be an interesting speaker or not?
Yes.
yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
We had one several years ago, and she was really, really interesting. But what she talked about was all the 20 or 40 different tests and procedures she had to go through in order to be even accepted to be on this commission. It was quite amazing. But okay, I'll think about that. And do we have any other suggestions for speakers?
Well, since they can be anywhere, give us a minute to, I mean, I can try
Yeah.
to think about something. I forgot that because we're doing Zoom, people could be literally anywhere.
Right. That's another thing we were thinking about, if to continue our meetings on Zoom, that we have speakers because we can get speakers from all over, and maybe having some social events where we gather and enjoy each other's company. And we're looking for places where we can do that if anyone has any ideas. Okay.
We're going to be at Panera's tomorrow morning.
I'm going to end the recording right now. Cecilia, can you end the recording for us?
I will.
Thank you. Okay.